The warm autumn sun was setting as Oscar Brown's truck pulled into his driveway after a much-needed week-long fishing trip in Montana. As a retired Marine Corps veteran, these solitary retreats had become essential for his mental well-being, helping him cope with the PTSD that had followed him home from his third tour in Afghanistan. However, the peaceful feeling from his trip evaporated the moment he rounded the corner of his beloved single-story ranch house. The sight before him made his heart stop, and his hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His meticulously maintained garden, a therapeutic project recommended by his VA counselor, lay in ruins. The raised beds he'd built by hand were crushed, vegetables and herbs strewn across the mud like casualties of war. The mature oak trees that had provided shade for his grandfather's bench were reduced to fresh stumps, their severed limbs piled unceremoniously near his property line. But what truly made his blood run cold was the sight of his custom-built deck, a space where he'd spent countless hours finding solace in nature, being systematically dismantled by a crew of construction workers. Oscar barely registered putting his truck in park before he was out the door, his combat boots hitting the gravel with purpose. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to commanding troops. The workers paused, looking uncertain, but before any could respond, a sharp voice cut through the evening air. "Mr. Brown, I presume?" A woman in her mid-40s, dressed in an impeccable business suit despite the dusty surroundings, strode toward him with the confidence of someone used to getting her way. "I'm Carol Preston, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. We've been trying to reach you regarding numerous violations of our community standards." Oscar's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. He'd owned this property for 5 years, inherited it from his grandfather, who had built the house with his own hands in the 1960s, long before any fancy developments had sprung up in the area. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake. I'm not part of any homeowners association." Carol's perfectly maintained smile didn't waver as she pulled out a tablet, her manicured fingers scrolling through documents with practiced efficiency. "According to our records, your property falls within the recently expanded boundaries of Oakwood Heights. We sent multiple notices regarding the required property upgrades and landscaping standards. Your rustic additions," she gestured dismissively at the remains of his garden, "were in clear violation of Section 7.3 of our community guidelines." The familiar sensation of combat alertness crept up Oscar's spine, his senses heightening as they did in potentially hostile situations. He forced himself to take a deep breath, remembering the grounding techniques his therapist had taught him. "Show me the documentation that proves my property is part of your homeowners association," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Carol's smile faltered slightly. "Our legal team has determined that your property falls within our jurisdiction. Now, if you'll excuse me, these workers need to finish bringing the property up to code before sundown." She turned to walk away, clearly considering the matter settled. Oscar pulled out his phone, quickly dialing 911 while simultaneously taking photos of the destruction. "This is Oscar Brown at 1247 Old Mill Road. I need police assistance immediately. There are people trespassing on my property and destroying my home without authorization." He noticed Carol's step falter at his words, but she quickly recovered, pulling out her own phone. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived, their lights casting alternating red and blue shadows across the increasingly chaotic scene. Officer Hamilton, a local cop who'd responded to a few minor incidents in the area before, approached with a professionally neutral expression. "What's the situation here?" Oscar explained his side first, producing his property deed, tax records, and historical documentation from his truck's glove compartment. He'd learned long ago to keep important papers easily accessible. Carol interrupted frequently, insisting that the homeowners association had the authority to enforce community standards on adjacent properties, citing various legal precedents that sounded impressive but made Oscar's gut instinct for trouble tingle. Officer Hamilton listened to both sides, then made a call to the station. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, he turned to Carol. "Ma'am, I'm not seeing any legal documentation that incorporates Mr. Brown's property into your homeowners association. Without a court order or the owner's consent, you have no authority to modify or destroy private property. Carol's professional demeanor cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing her features. This is ridiculous. We have procedures in place. The board voted. We sent notices. She turned to the construction crew, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease. Continue with the work. Our lawyers will sort this out. Officer Hamilton stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. Ma'am, I'm ordering all work to stop immediately. If your crew continues, they'll be arrested for criminal damage to property. The same goes for any homeowners association officers present. The workers didn't need to be told twice. They began packing up their tools, some casting apologetic glances at Oscar. He barely noticed, too focused on documenting the damage with his phone's camera. The devastation was even worse up close. Years of careful cultivation destroyed in a matter of hours. Carol's voice took on a threatening tone. This isn't over, Mr. Brown. The Homeowners Association has significant legal resources at our disposal. We'll see how long you can afford to fight this. She turned on her heel, her designer shoes somehow managing to navigate the muddy ground with practice. Ease as the sun set completely, casting long shadows across the destruction. Officer Hamilton helped Oscar file a preliminary report. Document everything, he advised. Take videos, photos, get statements from neighbors if they witnessed anything, and get a lawyer, a good one. Oscar stood in his backyard long after everyone had left, the motion-activated security lights casting harsh shadows across the wasteland that had once been his sanctuary. The garden had been more than just plants to him. It had been therapy, a way to ground himself when the memories of war threatened to overwhelm him. Each vegetable he'd grown, each flower he'd planted, had been a small victory over his trauma. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the stump of one of the oak trees. His grandfather had planted these trees when he'd first built the house, telling young Oscar stories about how they would grow together, their roots deep in the same soil that had given their family a home for generations. Now they were gone, destroyed by someone who saw his sanctuary as nothing more than a blemish on their perfect suburban vision. As he walked through the debris, his military training kicked in. Assess the situation, identify the threat, formulate a response. Carol Preston and her homeowners association had clearly underestimated him, assuming he would be an easy target. Perhaps they thought his PTSD would make him retreat, make him an easy victim for their expansion plans. They had made a serious mistake. Oscar Brown hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from a fight. As he entered his house and began making calls, first to his bank to freeze any potential homeowners association charges, then to several local lawyers, he felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. This wasn't just about his property anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could steamroll over people's rights with impunity. By midnight, he had compiled all his documentation, created digital backups, and started a detailed journal of events. Tomorrow, he would begin reaching out to his neighbors, suspecting he wasn't the first target of the Homeowners Association's aggressive expansion tactics. But for now, he sat on what remained of his back steps, looking out over the moonlit destruction, and made a silent promise to his grandfather's memory. He would not only restore this place, but ensure that no one else would face the same violation of their sanctuary. The night grew colder, but Oscar remained vigilant, his mind already formulating strategies for the battle ahead. Carol Preston had threatened him with the Homeowners Association's legal resources, but she didn't know what she had started. Sometimes the biggest fights start with the smallest injustices, and Oscar Brown was ready for war. The morning after the incident, Oscar's military discipline kicked in. He was up before dawn, his laptop open on the kitchen table as he began his investigation into the Oakwood Heights Homeowner Association. Years of intelligence work in the Marines had taught him that information was often the best weapon, and he intended to gather as much ammunition as possible. His first call was to the county clerk's office the moment they opened. The clerk, a helpful woman named Martha, seemed troubled by his story. "That's odd," she said, shuffling through digital records. There's no official filing for homeowner association boundary expansion in that area. They would need to submit extensive documentation and get approval from the county commission. This revelation sparked Oscar's interest. He requested copies of all recent homeowner association filings from Oakwood Heights, and Martha promised to email them within the hour. While waiting, he created a detailed timeline of events on his laptop, noting every interaction and detail he could remember from the previous day. The email from Martha arrived with several attachments. As Oscar sifted through the documents, a pattern began to emerge. Over the past 18 months, Oakwood Heights had filed multiple requests for boundary adjustments, each one denied due to insufficient documentation or failure to notify affected property owners. Yet somehow, they were acting as if these approvals had been granted. A knock at his door interrupted his research. It was Tom Barton, his neighbor from 2 properties over. "Oscar, I saw what they did to your place," Tom said, his face grim. "The same thing almost happened to me 3 months ago." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Tom shared his story. The homeowner association had attempted to force him to comply with their regulations, claiming his property had been incorporated into their jurisdiction. They'd even sent contractors to inspect his property, though he'd caught them before any damage was done. "I threatened legal action, and they backed off," Tom explained. "But I've been documenting everything just in case." Tom's story prompted Oscar to create a new folder on his laptop, Neighbor Incidents. Before noon, 3 more neighbors had stopped by, each with similar tales of intimidation and harassment from Oakwood Heights Homeowner Association. Patricia Hamilton, an elderly widow, broke down in tears describing how they'd threatened to put a lien on her house for unauthorized landscaping, the rose garden she'd maintained for 40 years. Using his military network, Oscar reached out to a buddy who now worked as a private investigator. "Give me everything you can find on Carol Preston and the Homeowner Association board members," he requested. "Something about this doesn't add up." By mid-afternoon, the information started flowing in. Carol Preston hadn't always been Carol Preston. 5 years ago, she was Carol Whitman, involved in a similar homeowner association scandal in Colorado. The pattern was nearly identical: aggressive expansion, unauthorized modifications to private property, and sudden implementation of strict guidelines. That homeowner association had eventually been dissolved after a class action lawsuit, but Carol had disappeared before the final judgment. The real breakthrough came when Oscar started cross-referencing the construction companies used by the homeowner association. Elite Renovation Services, the company that had destroyed his garden, was registered to Justin Preston, Carol's husband. Further digging revealed a web of companies, all connected to homeowner association board members or their families. Every forced renovation, every mandated upgrade, every approved contractor led back to this inner circle. Oscar's investigation was interrupted by another visitor, Terry Foster, a former city council member who lived on the other side of Oakwood Heights. "I've been following these people for months," Terry confided, spreading out his own collection of documents on Oscar's kitchen table. "They're running a sophisticated real estate scheme." Terry's documents revealed the bigger picture. The homeowner association's aggressive expansion wasn't just about control. It was about property values and future development. They were targeting specific properties that, if acquired and rezoned, would create a continuous luxury development corridor worth millions. The harassment and property destruction weren't random acts of authority. They were calculated moves to force homeowners to sell. "Look at this," Terry pointed to a map he'd brought. "Every property they've targeted forms a perfect line from their current development to the new highway interchange that's being built. Once they control this corridor, they'll petition for rezoning. The property values will skyrocket." Oscar's phone buzzed with an email from his PI friend. Attached were records of recent board meetings obtained through a contact in the county records office. The minutes revealed heated discussions about aggressive community expansion and necessary pressure tactics. One particular note caught his eye: a motion to allocate $500,000 for legal contingencies related to their expansion plan. As evening approached, Oscar had filled 3 legal pads with notes and created an extensive digital archive of evidence. The picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just about an overzealous homeowner association. It was a calculated real estate grab, using the homeowner association as a legal shield for what amounted to property theft. He was about to break for dinner when his doorbell rang again. This time, it was Rachel Martinez, a paralegal who lived in Oakwood Heights proper. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "I work for the firm that handles the homeowner association's legal affairs," she whispered. "What they're doing, it's not right. I've been collecting evidence." Rachel's thumb drive contained a gold mine of information: internal emails, financial records, and, most damning of all, a presentation to potential investors outlining their community acquisition strategy. The documents showed a clear pattern of targeting properties owned by elderly residents, veterans, and others they deemed unlikely to mount significant legal challenges. "They're meeting tonight," Rachel added. "Emergency board session. Your property was supposed to be the first major acquisition in their new expansion phase. They're panicking because you fought back." Oscar spent the next few hours organizing all the evidence into clear, logical files. His military training and intelligence reporting proved invaluable as he created a comprehensive brief that any lawyer could easily follow. The story it told was damning: a systematic scheme of intimidation, property destruction, and fraud, all hidden behind the legitimate facade of a homeowner association. As midnight approached, Oscar received one final email from a secure account his PI friend used for sensitive information. Attached were Carol Preston's sealed court records from Colorado. The documents revealed that she'd faced criminal charges for similar activities before, but had escaped prosecution through a combination of legal maneuvering and leaving the state. Oscar leaned back in his chair, looking at the wall of evidence he'd assembled in just one day. The homeowner association had chosen the wrong target. They'd assumed a veteran with PTSD would be an easy mark, someone they could bully into submission. Instead, they'd found someone with the skills, determination, and now the evidence to bring their entire operation crashing down. Tomorrow, he would take all of this to his lawyer. But tonight, as he stood in his back door looking at the destruction they'd caused, Oscar felt a grim satisfaction. Carol Preston had threatened him with the homeowner association's legal resources, but she had no idea what was coming. The very methods they'd used to build their corrupt empire, detailed documentation, official records, and careful planning, would now become the tools of their destruction. In the distance, he could see the lights of a homeowners association board meeting through the windows of their community center. They were probably plotting their next move, unaware that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. Oscar Brown had gone from being their target to becoming their worst nightmare, a man with nothing left to lose and the evidence to destroy everything they'd built. The morning news team from Channel 7 arrived at Oscar's property just as the sun was rising, their satellite van casting long shadows. Across the devastated landscape, Courtney Barton, a veteran investigative reporter known for her exposés on corporate corruption, surveyed the destruction with a practiced eye while her cameraman captured footage of the ruined garden and tree stumps. "This is bigger than just property damage," Courtney said, reviewing the documentation Oscar had prepared. "This is about systematic abuse of power and the erosion of property rights. We're running this story tonight." Word spread quickly through the community. By mid-morning, dozens of neighbors had gathered on Oscar's property, many bringing chairs, coffee, and snacks as if preparing for a long siege. Tom Barton had set up a folding table where people could sign affidavits about their experiences with the homeowner association. Patricia Hamilton was there, her trembling hands clutching decades of gardening photos that documented the heritage roses the homeowner association had threatened to destroy. The crowd grew as former Oakwood Heights residents began arriving, having seen social media posts about the gathering. Carol Williams, who had lost her home 2 years ago after failing to pay mounting homeowner association fines, broke down as she described how the association had rejected her hardship application during her cancer treatment. "They wouldn't even let me appeal," she sobbed. "They just kept adding fines until I had to sell." Local businesses, sensing an opportunity to support the community, began showing up with donations. Joe's Hardware supplied folding chairs and canopies to shelter the growing crowd from the sun. Maria's deli sent over sandwiches and drinks. The gathering was transforming from a protest into something more, a community finally finding its voice. Around noon, a sleek black SUV pulled up. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, introducing himself as Marcus Reynolds from the Sterling and Reynolds law firm. "I've been following homeowner association abuse cases across the state," he explained to Oscar. "What's happening here fits a pattern we've been tracking. My firm would be interested in representing you pro bono." Reynolds wasn't alone. Other lawyers began arriving, drawn by the mounting evidence of systematic abuse. They set up impromptu consultation stations under the canopies, helping residents document their experiences and understand their legal rights. The scene resembled a legal aid clinic more than a protest. The media presence grew throughout the day. Local newspapers sent reporters, and regional TV stations picked up the story. Social media was buzzing with hashtags like hashtag homeowner association abuse and hashtag stand with Oscar. Veterans groups, having heard about an injured warrior's sanctuary being destroyed, began posting messages of support and offering assistance. Carol Preston made her only appearance around 2 p.m., attempting to hold an impromptu press conference at the edge of the property. Her practiced smile faltered as she faced a barrage of questions about the documents Oscar had uncovered. When a reporter asked about her history in Colorado, she abruptly ended the conference and retreated to her car, pursued by cameras. The atmosphere shifted when Carl Ramirez, a former homeowner association board member, arrived with a box of documents. "I resigned 3 months ago," he explained, his voice heavy with guilt. "I couldn't sleep at night knowing what they were doing to people." His records included minutes from closed-door meetings where board members had openly discussed using intimidation tactics to force property sales. By late afternoon, the gathering had attracted the attention of state officials. State Representative Maria Gonzalez arrived. Having seen the coverage on local news, she moved through the crowd, listening to stories and taking notes. "This isn't just about one homeowner association," she announced to the assembled media. "This is about preventing abuse of power across our state. I'm drafting legislation to strengthen oversight of homeowners associations." Veterans groups arrived in force as the day progressed. The local VFW post set up a support station, and fellow veterans formed an informal honor guard around Oscar's property. Many were outraged that a combat veteran's therapeutic garden had been targeted. Their presence added moral weight to the gathering and ensured everything remained peaceful despite the growing anger. Local environmental groups joined the crowd after learning about the destroyed oak trees. They brought an arborist who documented the age and value of the lost trees, adding another layer to the mounting legal case. The arborist's preliminary estimate valued the destroyed trees at over $50,000, given their age and historical significance. As evening approached, the gathering took on a different character. Someone brought guitars, and impromptu songs about community and resistance filled the air. Neighbors who had lived near each other for years without really connecting were sharing stories and contact information. The homeowner association's attempt to divide and conquer had inadvertently united the community. The most powerful moment came at sunset when Patricia Hamilton led a candlelight vigil. Hundreds of lights flickered in the growing darkness as she shared her story of immigrating to America, buying her home, and nurturing her garden for 4 decades. "They tried to take away our homes," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "Instead, they gave us a community." Local religious leaders arrived to show support, emphasizing the moral dimension of the struggle. Rabbi Goldman spoke eloquently about the sacred nature of home and garden, while Reverend Jackson led prayers for justice and community healing. Their presence transformed the gathering into something approaching a moral crusade. As night fell, the crowd thinned but didn't disappear entirely. A core group of veterans and neighbors insisted on maintaining a presence on the property, concerned that the homeowner association might attempt further demolition under cover of darkness. They set up a rotation schedule, with teams of volunteers watching through the night. Oscar spent the evening moving between different groups, listening to stories and gathering more evidence. The pattern was clear. The The homeowner association had systematically targeted the vulnerable, counting on isolation and fear to prevent organized resistance. But their attack on his property had become the catalyst for something they hadn't anticipated: genuine community organization. Marcus Reynolds pulled Oscar aside just before midnight. "We've got more than enough for a class action lawsuit," he said, reviewing the day's testimonies. "But this is bigger than just legal action. You've started a movement here. People are finally standing up to homeowner association abuse across the state." As the night deepened, Oscar sat on his back steps, watching the small groups of people still talking under the canopies. The destruction of his garden had been devastating, but something new was growing in its place. A community united against injustice, supporting each other in ways he hadn't thought possible. His phone buzzed with a text from Courtney Barton. "Story runs at 11. This is going national tomorrow." Attached was a preview clip of her report titled "Homeowner Association Corruption Exposed: Veterans and Elderly Targeted in Property Scheme." The evidence was overwhelming. The narrative was compelling. Carol Preston and her board would wake up to find their carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble around them. Volunteers were already planning the next day's activities: more legal consultations, community meetings, and the beginning of efforts to restore his garden. What the homeowner association had meant to destroy was being rebuilt, not just as one-man sanctuary, but as a symbol of community resistance to institutional bullying. The war wasn't over. Oscar knew the homeowner association would fight back with everything they had, but looking at the united community around him, he realized they'd already lost their most powerful weapon: the ability to isolate and intimidate individuals. In trying to destroy one veteran's garden, they had planted the seeds of their own destruction. The first court hearing arrived on a crisp Monday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the initial incident. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters, media, and curious onlookers as Marcus Reynolds led his legal team through the main entrance, carrying boxes of evidence and depositions. Oscar, dressed in his Marine Corps dress blues, walked beside him, his military bearing evident in every step. Inside the courtroom, Carol Preston and the Homeowner Association board members sat with their own impressive array of lawyers from Carson & White, one of the state's most expensive firms. Their lead attorney, Richard Carson himself, exuded confidence as he arranged documents on their table, occasionally whispering to his clients with a reassuring smile. Judge Elena Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach to property law cases, studied both parties carefully as the proceedings began. Carson opened with a polished speech about community standards and property values, presenting a carefully crafted narrative of the homeowner association as guardians of neighborhood quality. "Your Honor, everything done was within the scope of our authority and in the best interests of the community," he concluded smoothly. Reynolds' response was devastating in its simplicity. He played a video compilation of security camera footage from multiple properties, showing homeowner association hired contractors entering properties without permission, conducting unauthorized work, and in some cases, removing personal property. The footage from Oscar's cameras was particularly damning, clearly showing Carol Preston directing the destruction of his garden, despite being shown documentation that his property wasn't under homeowner association jurisdiction. "Your Honor," Reynolds said, his voice steady, "this isn't about community standards. This is about systematic abuse of power for personal profit." He then presented the financial records Rachel Martinez had provided, showing the connection between board members and the construction companies receiving homeowner association contracts. The first crack in the homeowner association's facade appeared during Carol Preston's deposition. Under Reynolds' careful questioning, she struggled to explain the discrepancy between her testimony and the documented timeline of events. When confronted with her history in Colorado, she invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, causing visible concern among her fellow board members. Justin Preston, Carol's husband and owner of Elite Renovation Services, proved to be an even more problematic witness. His attempt to justify the inflated costs of homeowner association-mandated repairs fell apart under cross-examination. The breaking point came when Reynolds produced emails showing Justin discussing how to maximize profits from forced upgrades with other board members' companies. The court's attention shifted to the human cost of the homeowner associations. Patricia Hamilton testified about the emotional trauma of having her 40-year-old rose garden threatened. Her testimony was followed by Carol Williams, who described losing her home during cancer treatment due to mounting homeowner association fines. Medical records confirmed her story, showing how stress from the homeowner association harassment had complicated her recovery. During a lunch recess, Carson approached Reynolds with a settlement offer. The homeowner association would pay for all damages, reverse all unauthorized actions, and implement new oversight measures. Reynolds brought the offer to Oscar and the other plaintiffs gathered in a conference room. "They're scared," he explained. "But this isn't just about money anymore." The afternoon session brought revelations about the homeowner association's expansion plans. Terry Foster testified about the connection between their targeted harassment and the planned highway interchange, presenting maps and development proposals that showed how the homeowner association stood to profit from forcing property sales. State Transportation Department records confirmed that board members had inside information about the highway project before it was publicly announced. Carl Ramirez's testimony proved crucial. As a former board member turned whistleblower, he provided detailed accounts of closed-door meetings where the board discussed their strategy of targeting vulnerable homeowners. His documentation included recordings of Carol Preston specifically mentioning Oscar's PTSD as a factor that would make him easier to handle. The homeowner association's defense began to unravel further when their financial experts struggled to explain numerous discrepancies in the association's books. Reynolds methodically walked through years of suspicious transactions, showing how money flowed from homeowner fines through a maze of shell companies before ending up in board members' personal accounts. Judge Martinez's intervention came during testimony about the destroyed oak trees. The homeowner association's lawyer attempted to dismiss the trees' value as mere landscaping, prompting a sharp response from a bench. "Those trees were older than this courthouse," the judge noted. "Their destruction shows a disturbing disregard for both property rights and environmental stewardship." The turning point came when Rachel Martinez took the stand. Despite visible nervousness, she methodically outlined how the homeowner association's legal firm had helped construct the facade of legitimacy around their actions. Her testimony included internal memos discussing how to create the appearance of legal authority over properties they had no right to control. As the day progressed, more homeowner association board members began to distance themselves from Carol. Pressed during a brief recess, two of them approached Reynolds about cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced personal liability. Their subsequent testimony revealed a pattern of intimidation within the board itself, with Preston threatening to expose members who questioned her methods. The technical aspects of the case proved equally damning. A forensic accountant presented analysis showing how the homeowner association had systematically inflated fines and fees, using the money to fund their expansion efforts. The practice went beyond mere profit-seeking into what the expert termed organized financial exploitation. By late afternoon, the homeowner association's legal team was in disarray. Carson's confident demeanor had given way to grim resignation as he watched his defense strategy crumble. When Reynolds presented evidence that Carson's own firm had helped draft the fraudulent property incorporation documents, several junior lawyers from his team quietly gathered their things and left the courtroom. Judge Martinez called both legal teams to her chambers near day's end. Her message was clear. The evidence of wrongdoing was overwhelming, and she was prepared to refer several matters to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. She strongly advised the homeowner association to consider their position before proceedings resumed the next day. The day concluded with Reynolds presenting a final piece of evidence, a comprehensive analysis of property values in areas where the homeowner association had conducted their improvement campaigns. The data showed that while overall neighborhood values had indeed increased, the original homeowners had been systematically forced out, unable to afford the manufactured costs of compliance with homeowner association regulations. As the court adjourned, Oscar stood quietly at the plaintiff's table, watching Carol Preston and her remaining board members hurry from the courtroom. The day's proceedings had exposed not just the corruption in one homeowner association, but a sophisticated scheme of property theft disguised as community improvement. His military training had taught him that sometimes the biggest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from exposing the truth that destroys them from within. Outside the courthouse, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers as Reynolds emerged to give a brief statement to the press. But Oscar's attention was drawn to a group of elderly residents from another neighborhood, clutching homeowner association documents and asking if someone would help them too. The day's revelations had given hope to others facing similar battles, transforming a personal fight for justice into something much larger. The war wasn't over. There would be appeals, countersuits, and likely years of legal maneuvering ahead. But as Oscar drove home that evening past the ruins of his garden, where volunteers were already beginning restoration work, he knew that the truth exposed in that courtroom had changed everything. The homeowner association's weapon of fear had been broken, replaced by something far more powerful: a community's determination to stand together against injustice. The final judgment came down exactly 3 months after the initial court hearing. Judge Martinez's decision was unprecedented in its scope and severity. The Oakwood Heights Homeowner Association was not just ordered to pay damages. It was completely dissolved, its assets frozen, and its board members held personally liable for their actions. The total compensation awarded to affected homeowners exceeded $12 million, with Oscar's case serving as the cornerstone of the judgment. Judge Martinez's written opinion was scathing. This court has witnessed not merely negligence or overreach, but a calculated conspiracy to defraud homeowners of their property rights through systematic abuse of homeowner association authority, she wrote. The actions of the board members represent a profound betrayal of community trust and a perversion of the very purpose of homeowners associations. Carol Preston wasn't present for the reading of the judgment. She had fled the state 2 weeks earlier when criminal indictments became imminent. Federal marshals apprehended her at a small airport in New Mexico, attempting to board a private plane to Mexico. Her husband, Justin, was arrested the same day while trying to transfer millions in homeowner association funds to offshore accounts. The ripple effects of the case spread quickly through the legal community. State legislators, spurred by public outrage, fast-tracked Representative Gonzalez's Homeowner Protection Act. The new law established strict oversight of homeowner associations, required transparent financial reporting, and created an independent review board for handling disputes. Most importantly, it set clear criminal penalties for homeowner association board members who abuse their authority. Local news coverage of the judgment focused on the human impact. Channel 7's Courtney Barton produced a special report featuring interviews with families who had reclaimed their homes. Patricia Hamilton, tears streaming down her face, showed viewers her restored rose garden, now protected by legal covenant from future interference. Carol Williams, now in remission, received enough compensation to repurchase her former home. The transformation of Oscar's property became a symbol of community renewal. What had started as a group of neighbors helping to rebuild his garden evolved into something larger. Local landscapers and architects volunteered their services to create a memorial garden, incorporating the stumps of the destroyed oak trees into a dramatic centerpiece that told the story of resistance against corruption. Veterans groups took particular interest in the project. The local VFW chapter established a foundation to maintain the garden and create similar therapeutic spaces for other veterans. Oscar's experience had highlighted the healing power of gardening for PTSD sufferers, leading to partnerships with VA hospitals across the state to develop horticultural therapy programs. The professional consequences for those involved in the scheme were severe. Richard Carson's law firm dissolved under the weight of ethics investigations and client departures. Rachel Martinez, the whistleblower, received a full scholarship to law school and an offer to join Marcus Reynolds' firm after graduation. The construction companies owned by board members were banned from government contracts and faced their own criminal investigations. Criminal proceedings against the board members moved swiftly. Carol and Justin Preston both faced multiple felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Other board members, seeking leniency, provided evidence that revealed similar schemes in other states. Federal authorities launched a nationwide investigation into homeowner association fraud, using the Oakwood Heights case as a template. The community itself underwent a remarkable transformation. The artificial barriers created by the homeowner association dissolved, replaced by genuine connections between neighbors. Monthly community meetings, once dreaded occasions for announcing new restrictions, became celebrations of shared accomplishments. The development's rigid uniformity gave way to a vibrant diversity of gardens, colors, and architectural expressions. 1 year to the day after the initial incident, Oscar stood in his restored garden, surrounded by new growth and old friends. The therapeutic space had expanded beyond his property lines, with neighboring yards joining together to create a continuous green space. Children played freely across formerly forbidden property lines while their parents shared gardening tips and stories. The oak trees, though gone, had not been forgotten. Local artists had transformed the stumps into sculptures, their rings telling the story of decades of growth. Around them, new saplings, descendants of the original trees, grown from carefully preserved acorns, were taking root. Patricia Hamilton's grandchildren helped tend them, learning the value of patience and preservation. Oscar's grandfather's bench, restored and reinforced, became a gathering place for veterans seeking peace in the garden. Weekly support group meetings moved from sterile VA offices to this living sanctuary, where the therapeutic power of nature helped heal wounds, both visible and hidden. The garden's success led to a statewide initiative to create similar spaces in other communities. The legal precedent set by the case had lasting implications. Courts across the country cited Judge Martinez's opinion in similar cases, leading to a fundamental shift in how homeowner association authority was viewed and regulated. The balance of power moved back toward individual homeowners, with associations returning to their original purpose of community support rather than control. Carol Preston's sentencing hearing marked the final chapter of the direct conflict. Before receiving a 15-year prison term, she faced the community she had attempted to destroy. Oscar, speaking for the victims, surprised everyone by expressing hope that she would use her time to reflect on the true meaning of community. "The garden you tried to destroy," he said, "has grown back stronger, just like the community you tried to divide." The Homeowner Protection Act became a model for national legislation. Representative Gonzalez, invited to speak at congressional hearings, brought photos of Oscar's restored garden as evidence of what communities could achieve when freed from oppressive oversight. The law's success led to her election to the U.S. Senate, where she continued to champion property rights and community empowerment. On quiet evenings, Oscar often sat on his grandfather's bench, watching the sunset through the growing canopy of young oak trees. The garden had become more than just his sanctuary. It was a living testament to the power of community resistance against corruption. Visitors from across the country came to see it, leaving with seeds of hope and stories of inspiration for their own struggles. The final transformation came when the community voted to establish a land trust, ensuring that the connected gardens and community spaces would be preserved for future generations. The legal documents, drafted by Marcus Reynolds pro bono, included a simple but powerful preamble. "This land, once divided by greed and fear, is hereby united in perpetuity as a testament to the triumph of community over corruption." As summer faded into autumn, Oscar watched children playing among the new plantings, their laughter mixing with the rustle of leaves. The garden that had once been his private therapy had grown into something far more meaningful, a living symbol of healing, not just for one veteran, but for an entire community. The homeowner association had tried to create uniformity through control. Instead, they had inadvertently sparked a revolution of diversity, connection, and growth. The story of Oakwood Heights became a case study in law schools and community organizing programs. But for those who lived through it, The real lesson wasn't in the legal victories or policy changes. It was in the simple truth that when people stand together against injustice, they can create something more beautiful than any planned development. A genuine community rooted in mutual respect and growing stronger with each passing season.